Sarah's hands were shaking when she opened the eviction notice. 30 days. That's all she had left before her children would have nowhere to sleep. It was a Tuesday night when everything started to fall apart, though if Sarah were being honest, things had been falling apart for years. She stood in the fluorescent glow of the hospital break room, her scrubs stained with coffee and something she didn't want to think about, staring at her phone screen. 3 missed calls from Emma. 2 texts from the school about Ben. And 1 voicemail from her landlord that she already knew would ruin her week. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. Her shift had started at 6 that morning. 17 hours. 17 hours of checking vitals, changing bandages, holding the hands of strangers while they cried or died or both. And for what? A paycheck that disappeared before it even hit her account. Child support that came when her ex-husband felt like it, which was almost never. And now this. This envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her coat pocket. She'd found it taped to her apartment door when she'd run home during her lunch break to check on the kids. White paper. Red letters. The kind of official-looking document that makes your stomach drop before you even read the words. 30 days to vacate the premises. Due to non-payment of rent. Sarah wasn't stupid. She knew this was coming. She'd been 2 months behind since July, and it was October now. She'd promised the landlord she'd catch up. She'd promised herself she'd figure it out. But promises don't pay bills, and hope doesn't keep the lights on. When Sarah finally made it home that night, it was past midnight. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of the television in the living room. Emma was asleep on the couch, her laptop still open on her chest, headphones half fallen out of her ears. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her daughter breathe. 19 years old and already carrying the weight of a life that wasn't supposed to be hers. Emma had dropped out of college last spring. Not because she'd failed. Not because she didn't want to be there. But because someone had to help at home, and Ben was only 9, and Sarah couldn't do it all alone. Emma never said it out loud, but Sarah could see the resentment in her eyes sometimes. The way she'd look at her high school friends' social media posts, their dorm rooms and their freedom and their futures that still looked wide open. Emma had traded all of that for online classes she took between making Ben's lunches and doing the grocery shopping and pretending everything was fine. Sarah walked into the kitchen and set her bag down on the table. The bills were still there from this morning. Electric, water, internet, credit cards with balances that made her nauseous. And now, on top of everything, an eviction notice. She poured herself a glass of water and sat down in the dark. This was her life now. This endless cycle of exhaustion and fear and trying to hold together a family that kept threatening to split at the seams. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend, Monica. Coffee tomorrow? I need to talk to you about something. Sarah almost laughed. Tomorrow. As if she had time for tomorrow. Across town, in a garage that smelled like oil and old regrets, Mark was lying under a Toyota Camry trying to figure out why he couldn't fix his own life as easily as he fixed other people's cars. The wrench slipped. His knuckles hit metal. He swore, loud and sharp in the empty space. It was almost 1 in the morning. He should have been home hours ago. But home wasn't really home anymore. It was just a place where his son Jake barely spoke to him and the walls seemed to close in a little more each day. Mark slid out from under the car and sat up, wiping his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. 40 years old. A garage that was bleeding money. A kid who hated him. And as of this morning, an eviction notice of his own. He'd known the business was struggling. He'd known for months. But he'd kept telling himself it would turn around. 1 good month. That's all he needed. 1 good month and he could catch up on the rent for the garage, pay off some of the debt, maybe even take Jake out for a decent meal. But good months didn't come anymore. Customers went to the bigger shops, the ones with shiny waiting rooms and free coffee and mechanics who didn't look as tired as Mark felt. And Jake. God, Jake. 18 years old and angry at the world. Skipping school. Getting into fights. Coming home with bruises he wouldn't explain and an attitude that made Mark want to shake him and hug him at the same time. Mark's phone rang. He almost didn't answer. But it was his buddy, Dave. You still up? Dave's voice was rough, like he'd been drinking. Yeah. Working. At 1 a.m. Bills don't care what time it is. Dave was quiet for a second. Then he said, I heard about the eviction. I'm sorry, man. Mark closed his eyes. Of course Dave had heard. Everyone heard everything in this town. I'll figure it out. Actually, Dave said, that's why I'm calling. The next afternoon, Sarah met Monica at the diner on 5th Street. The kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since yesterday. Monica was already there when Sarah arrived, stirring sugar into her cup with the kind of focus that meant she was nervous about something. Okay, Sarah said, sliding into the booth. What's going on? You sounded weird in your text. Monica looked up. How much do you trust me? Sarah frowned. That's a terrifying way to start a conversation. I'm serious. Do you trust me? Monica, I've known you since high school. Of course I trust you. Why? What did you do? Monica took a breath. I think I found a solution to your rent problem. Sarah's chest tightened. What kind of solution? Hear me out before you say no, okay? Just hear me out. And then Monica told her. There was a guy. A friend of Dave's. Mark something. He was a mechanic. Single dad. Also getting evicted. Also desperate. And Dave had this idea. What if they moved in together? Not like that. Not romantic. Just practical. 2 families. 1 house. Split the rent. Share the expenses. Make it work. Sarah stared at her. You're joking. I'm not. Monica, I don't even know this person. I know, but you want me to move my kids in with a stranger? A man I've never met. He's not a stranger. Dave knows him. He's a good guy. He's just going through it like you are. Sarah shook her head. This is insane. Is it? Monica leaned forward. Sarah, you have 30 days. What's your plan? Where are you going to go? I don't know yet, but nothing. You're out of options. And so is he. This could actually work. Sarah wanted to argue. She wanted to stand up and walk out and pretend this conversation never happened. But the eviction notice was in her purse. And Ben needed stability. And Emma needed to not have to drop out of life completely just to keep their family afloat. What if he's dangerous? Sarah whispered. He's not. Dave vouches for him. He's got a kid too. He's not going to put his son at risk any more than you'd put yours. Sarah pressed her fingers against her temples. This is the worst idea I've ever heard. Maybe. But it's the only idea you've got. That same night, Mark sat across from Dave in the back of a bar that had seen better decades, listening to the same pitch Sarah had heard hours earlier. You've lost your mind, Mark said. Dave shrugged. Probably. But I'm not the one getting evicted. Moving in with a stranger isn't going to fix that. It'll buy you time. And her too. She's got 2 kids. You've got Jake. You split a 3-bedroom house. You cut your costs in half. Maybe more. Mark rubbed his face. Jake would lose his mind. He barely tolerates me. You think he's going to be okay with 2 random people moving in? He's 18. He'll deal. He's angry, Dave. He's a kid who needs a roof over his head. So does her son. So does her daughter. You think pride is going to keep you warm when you're sleeping in your car. Mark hated that Dave was right. He hated everything about this. But the eviction notice was real. The failing business was real. And the look in Jake's eyes when Mark told him they might have to move again, that was real too. What's her name? Mark asked quietly. Sarah. She's a nurse. Works crazy hours. Good person. Monica says she's desperate, just like you. Mark laughed, bitter and tired. Desperate. That's the selling point. It's honest. Mark stared at his beer. This is going to blow up in our faces. Maybe. Or maybe it saves both of you. Sarah spent 3 days thinking about it. 3 days of looking at apartments she couldn't afford. 3 days of watching Emma pretend everything was fine while her jaw stayed tight. 3 days of Ben asking if they were going to have to move again and trying to smile when she said she didn't know. On the 4th day, she called Monica back. Set up a meeting. I want to talk to him first, before I agree to anything. Smart. I'll tell Dave. 2 days later, Sarah and Mark met at a neutral location. A park bench near the elementary school where neither of their kids went. It was October and the leaves were falling and the air smelled like cold and change. They sat 3 feet apart. Strangers trying to decide if they could survive each other. Mark spoke first. I'm not looking for a friend. I just need a place to live. Sarah nodded. Same. I work a lot. I won't be around much. I work nights. I'll barely see you. My son is going through something. He's not easy right now. My daughter gave up college to help me. She resents me for it. My son is 9 and scared all the time. Mark looked at her then. Really looked at her. And Sarah saw it. The same exhaustion. The same fear. The same desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this insane plan could work. 30 days. Mark asked. 30 days, Sarah confirmed. Then we're both out of options. Mark exhaled. Okay. Let's do it. The house they found was nothing special. A rental on the east side of town. 3 bedrooms. 2 bathrooms. A kitchen that had seen better years. But it had a yard. And it was cheaper than either of them could manage alone. The move-in day was chaos. Jake refused to help. He sat in the driveway with his headphones on, glaring at anyone who came near him. Emma was polite but distant, carrying boxes with mechanical efficiency, her face blank. Ben clung to Sarah's side, asking questions she didn't have answers to. And Mark and Sarah moved around each other like dancers who hadn't learned the steps yet. Awkward. Careful. Trying not to collide. By the time the sun set, they were all exhausted. The house smelled like cardboard and cleaning supplies. Half the boxes were still unpacked. But the beds were set up. The fridge was stocked. And for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like she could breathe. That night, they gathered in the kitchen. All 5 of them. Sarah had made spaghetti. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and it was enough. They sat around the table in silence at first. Ben picked at his food. Jake stared at his phone. Emma ate mechanically. Mark and Sarah exchanged glances. So, Mark said finally, I guess we're roommates now. Sarah almost smiled. I guess we are. Jake snorted. Emma said nothing. Ben looked up. Are we a family now? The question hung in the air. Sarah opened her mouth. Closed it. She didn't know how to answer that. Mark cleared his throat. We're figuring it out, buddy. One day at a time. Ben seemed to accept that. He went back to his spaghetti. And for a moment, just a moment, it almost felt like this could work. Almost. That night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah stood in the kitchen washing dishes. Mark came in for a glass of water. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They both knew what they'd done. They'd taken a leap. They'd bet everything on a living situation that made no sense. 2 broken families under one roof. 2 strangers trying to survive. And as Sarah dried the last plate and Mark headed back to his room, one question hung in the air. One question that neither of them wanted to ask out loud. But it was there. In the silence. In the uncertainty. In the strange new reality they'd just created. What happens when survival and something else start to blur together? When the lines you drew to protect yourself start to fade? When the person you're supposed to keep at arm's length becomes the one who understands you most? The answer was coming. They just didn't know it yet. The first morning in the house, Sarah woke up to the smell of coffee she didn't make. For a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, she forgot where she was. Forgot about the eviction. Forgot about the stranger living down the hall. Then she heard footsteps. Heavy. Unfamiliar. And reality crashed back in. She pulled on her robe and walked into the kitchen. Mark was already there, dressed for work, pouring coffee into a thermos. They looked at each other. 2 people who'd made a choice they couldn't take back. Morning, Mark said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept much either. Morning. Sarah moved past him to start breakfast. Their arms almost touched. Both of them pulled back like they'd been burned. This was going to be harder than either of them thought. But they didn't know yet just how hard it would become. They didn't know that proximity can be more dangerous than distance. That shared space can create shared secrets. And that sometimes the biggest mistake you make is the one that feels like relief. The first few weeks were exactly what they'd promised each other. Practical. Distant. Functional. Mark left early for the garage. Sarah worked her shifts. They passed each other in hallways like ghosts sharing a haunted house. The kids were a different story. Jake stayed in his room most of the time, headphones on, door locked, sending a clear message that he wanted nothing to do with this arrangement. Ben, on the other hand, was curious. He'd knock on Jake's door sometimes, asking if he wanted to play video games. Jake always said no, but Sarah noticed he said it a little less harshly each time. Emma was the wild card. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, helping with meals, keeping Ben entertained, doing her online classes in the corner of the living room. But Sarah could feel her daughter watching, observing, judging. One night at dinner, their second week in the house, something shifted. Mark had picked up pizza on his way home. They gathered around the table, all 5 of them, and for the first time, conversation happened. Real conversation. Ben asked Mark about cars. Mark explained how engines worked in a way that made Ben's eyes light up. Jake, despite himself, looked up from his phone. Emma asked a question about transmissions. And suddenly they weren't strangers eating food in silence. They were people talking. It was small. It was fragile. But it was something. Sarah caught Mark's eye across the table. He almost smiled. Almost. And that's when the danger began. Not in the big moments, but in the small ones. In the almost smiles and the accidental glances and the slow realization that maybe this person across from you isn't as much of a stranger as you need them to be. It started with Emma's laptop. A week later, late on a Tuesday night, her computer crashed in the middle of an assignment. She was in the kitchen, nearly in tears, staring at the frozen screen. Mark came in for water. Saw her frustration. "What's wrong?" "My laptop died. I have a paper due tomorrow and I just lost everything." Mark set down his glass. "Let me see." He sat down next to her, close enough that she could smell motor oil and soap. He worked in silence for 10 minutes, his fingers moving over keys with surprising gentleness. Then the screen flickered. Everything came back. "How did you used to fix computers before I opened the garage? You should back this up. I can show you how." Emma looked at him. Really looked at him. Not as her mom's weird roommate, but as someone who'd just saved her. "Thank you." "No problem." But neither of them moved. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator, and something unspoken passed between them. Something that should have stayed buried. Mark stood up first. "Get some sleep. And back up your files." Emma nodded. But after he left, she sat there for a long time, staring at the space where he'd been. The next night, she found him in the garage working on his truck. "Can I help?" she asked from the doorway. Mark looked up, surprised. "You want to help me fix a truck?" "I want to learn something useful. College wasn't teaching me anything real anyway." Mark hesitated. Then he handed her a wrench. "Okay. Let's start with the basics." And just like that, the late-night talks began. Emma would come out to the garage after Sarah went to work. They'd talk while Mark worked. About dreams that died. About pressure and expectations. About feeling like you're failing everyone who believes in you. Mark never patronized her. Never treated her like a kid. He listened. He understood. And Emma, who'd been holding everything together for so long, finally felt like someone saw her. But understanding can be dangerous, especially when it comes from the wrong person at the wrong time. Sarah noticed the change in Emma before she understood what it meant. Her daughter smiled more, laughed at Mark's jokes during dinner, stayed up later even when she didn't have assignments due. At first, Sarah thought it was good. Emma was adjusting, opening up, finding some kind of peace in this strange arrangement. But then she noticed other things. The way Emma's eyes followed Mark when he walked into a room. The way she'd volunteer to help him with projects. The way she'd bring him coffee without being asked. And the way Mark, despite his obvious attempts to maintain distance, would light up just a little when Emma was around. Sarah told herself she was imagining it. Emma was 19. Mark was 40. There was nothing there. There couldn't be. But late one night, Sarah came home early from her shift. A patient had cancelled. She walked into the house quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. That's when she heard voices in the garage. Emma's laugh. Mark's low rumble of a response. Sarah walked to the garage door. Stopped. Listened. "You're the first person who doesn't treat me like I'm broken," Emma was saying. "You're not broken. You're just finding your way." The tenderness in Mark's voice made Sarah's chest tighten. She should have opened the door. Should have interrupted. Should have put a stop to whatever this was before it became something. But she didn't. She stood there, frozen, as a terrible understanding began to dawn. And she said nothing. Because sometimes we let things grow in the dark, hoping they'll die on their own. We never learn that darkness is where the most dangerous things thrive. The night it all came to a head was a Friday in late November. Sarah had picked up an extra shift. Jake was staying at a friend's house. Ben was at a sleepover. The house was empty except for Emma and Mark. They didn't plan it. They never planned anything. But Emma's father had called that afternoon. Asked for money he hadn't earned. Made promises he wouldn't keep. Reopened wounds that never fully healed. By the time Mark got home from the garage, Emma was sitting on the back porch in the cold, crying. He found her there. Sat down beside her. "You okay?" She shook her head. He called. "My dad. Asking for money. Like he has any right." Mark was quiet. Then he said, "My ex-wife did the same thing for years. Took everything I had and still made me feel like it wasn't enough." Emma looked at him. "How do you stop caring?" "You don't. You just learn to carry it different." She leaned against him. "Just a little." Mark stiffened. He should have moved away. He knew he should have moved away. But he was tired. And lonely. And she was hurting. So he put his arm around her. Just for a moment. Just to offer comfort. "Why does it feel easier to talk to you than anyone else?" Emma whispered. Mark closed his eyes. This was the moment. This was where he should have pulled back, made an excuse, put distance between them. But instead, he said, "Because I'm not judging you. And maybe I need someone who's not judging me too." Emma turned to look at him. Her face was inches from his. "I care about you, Mark." The words hung between them like a confession and a dare. Mark's heart was pounding. "Emma, I'm what? Too young. I'm 19. I know what I feel. And I'm 40. And your mother trusted me. God, your mother trusted me." But even as he said it, his hand was still on her shoulder. His face was still close to hers. "I can't do this," Mark said, but he didn't move. "Neither can I," Emma whispered. "But I don't know how to stop." They sat there, frozen in that terrible moment where wrong and right blur together. Where loneliness and connection become the same thing. Where two people who should know better are on the edge of something that will ruin everything. Mark's hand moved to Emma's face. Her breath caught. And that's when the front door opened. Sarah stood in the doorway, still in her scrubs, her bag dropping from her shoulder. She'd come home early again. Another cancelled patient. Another twist of fate. She saw them. Close. Too close. Emma's tear-stained face. Mark's hand on her cheek. The intimacy that couldn't be explained away. The world stopped. Sarah's face went from confusion to understanding to something that looked like grief. "Get away from my daughter." Her voice was quiet. Deadly. Mark stood up fast, hands raised. "Sarah, nothing happened. Get away from her. Now." Emma was crying again, but different this time. "Mom, it's not what you think. Go to your room, Emma." "Mom." Now. Emma ran inside. Mark and Sarah stood in the cold November air, 3 feet apart, everything shattered between them. The next 3 days were a war zone. Sarah stopped speaking to Mark entirely. Emma locked herself in her room. Ben, sensing the tension, became quiet and watchful. And Jake, who'd been staying with his friend, came home to a house that felt like it was held together with broken glass and fury. Mark tried to explain. Tried to tell Sarah that nothing had happened, that it was just a moment, that he'd pulled away. But Sarah wouldn't listen. "You're 40 years old," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "She's my daughter. She dropped out of college to help me survive, and you took advantage of that." "I didn't touch her." "You were going to. I saw it. Don't lie to me." And Mark couldn't argue, because she was right. He had been on the edge of something unforgivable. The worst part was Emma. She tried to talk to Sarah, tried to explain her feelings. But Sarah shut her down. "You don't know what you're feeling. You're confused. You're grateful. But you don't love him, Emma. How do you know what I feel? Because I'm your mother. And I won't let you ruin your life for a man who should know better." The house became divided. Mark on one side, Sarah and Ben on another. Emma in the middle, lost and angry. And Jake, watching it all, realizing his father had done exactly what Jake always feared he would do. Let everyone down. The fights started. Sarah and Mark arguing about boundaries and responsibility. Emma and Sarah screaming about control and trust. Jake confronting his father in the driveway one afternoon, his face red with shame and rage. "Everyone's talking about it, Dad. You and her. What the hell were you thinking?" "Nothing happened, Jake. But you wanted it to. I saw how you looked at her. Like she could fix you or something." Mark had no answer. Because Jake was right. He had looked at Emma like she could save him. And that was the most selfish thing he'd ever done. 2 weeks after that night on the porch, Mark packed his things. The house had become unbearable. Every room held accusations. Every silence screamed with things unsaid. Sarah wouldn't look at him. Emma wouldn't speak to anyone. Ben asked questions no one could answer. And Jake made it clear his father was a disappointment. Again. Mark loaded his truck in the early morning before anyone was awake. Or so he thought. But Emma was standing in the driveway when he carried out his last box. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "I have to. Because of me." Mark set down the box. "Because I messed up. Because I let something happen that shouldn't have." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I meant what I said that night." "I know. That's what makes this so hard." "Then why are you leaving?" Mark looked at this young woman who'd made him feel seen and valued and human again. This person he'd hurt without meaning to. "Because staying would hurt you more. And I've already hurt enough people." He got in his truck. Started the engine. Emma stood in the driveway, watching him go. Inside the house, Sarah watched from the window, her arms wrapped around herself. And somewhere in the space between leaving and staying, 3 lives broke apart in ways they'd spend years trying to repair. The house that was supposed to save them had destroyed them instead. But maybe, just maybe, that destruction was necessary. Maybe sometimes you have to break completely before you can rebuild into something real. The question was simple, but the answer would take months to find. When the people we turn to for comfort become the ones who hurt us most, do we blame them for being human? Or do we blame ourselves for needing someone so desperately that we stopped seeing the danger? And how do you heal from a wound that everyone saw coming except you? **** Mark drove away as the sun came up. Emma walked back inside. Sarah closed the curtain. And the house that held them together finally let them fall apart. 3 months passed before any of them spoke again. 3 months of silence that felt like years. Mark found a small apartment above a laundromat on the other side of town. The kind of place where the walls were thin and the heat barely worked, and every night he lay awake wondering how he'd become the kind of man his son was ashamed of. Jake stayed with him on weekends, but the visits were tense. Conversations died before they started. They'd sit at the small kitchen table eating takeout, the space between them filled with everything Jake wanted to say but wouldn't. Mark knew his son was angry. He knew Jake felt betrayed. But what Mark didn't know was how to fix it. How do you explain to your child that you're just as lost as they are? That being a parent doesn't mean you have all the answers? That sometimes you make mistakes so big they change everything? He couldn't. So they sat in silence and pretended the elephant in the room didn't exist. Meanwhile, back at the house that was supposed to save them, Sarah was learning what it meant to stand alone again. She'd thrown herself into work. Double shifts. Triple shifts. Anything to avoid the empty rooms and the memory of what almost happened under her own roof. Ben tried to ask about Mark once. Is Mark coming back? Sarah had looked at her son, seen the confusion in his 9-year-old eyes, and felt her heart break all over again. No, sweetheart. He's not. Why? Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes mean people can't live together anymore. Ben had accepted this with the resilience of children who've learned that nothing ever stays the same. But Sarah saw the disappointment in his face. Another man who'd left. Another promise broken. Another piece of stability torn away. And then there was Emma. 2 weeks after Mark left, Emma packed a bag and moved out too. She didn't ask permission. Didn't give explanations. She just left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I need to figure out who I am without everyone telling me." Sarah found the note when she got home from her shift. She'd stood in the kitchen, holding that piece of paper, and for the first time in months, she'd cried. Not angry tears. Not betrayed tears. Just the deep, aching grief of a mother watching her daughter walk away and knowing there was nothing she could do to stop it. Emma found a studio apartment near campus. It was small. Barely affordable. But it was hers. She picked up her college classes again. This time in person. She got a part-time job at a bookstore. She started therapy. And slowly, painfully, she began to untangle the mess of feelings that had led her to that moment on the porch with Mark. Her therapist asked questions Emma didn't want to answer. What were you looking for in him? I don't know. Understanding, I guess. And why couldn't you find that in people your own age? Emma had sat with that question for a long time. Then she'd said, because they don't know what it's like to lose everything. Mark did. He understood what it felt like to be drowning. But was it really him you cared about? Or was it the feeling he gave you? Emma hadn't known how to answer that. But weeks later, living alone, learning to be responsible only for herself, she began to understand. She hadn't loved Mark. Not really. She'd loved the idea that someone saw her as capable. Valuable. Not broken. She'd been so busy taking care of everyone else that when someone finally took care of her, even just emotionally, she'd mistaken gratitude for something deeper. It was a painful realization. But it was also freeing. Because once she understood it, she could start to forgive herself. And maybe, eventually, she could forgive her mother too. Sarah spent those 3 months wrestling with her own demons. She was angry. At Mark for crossing lines he shouldn't have crossed. At Emma for not seeing the danger. But mostly at herself. She'd been so focused on survival that she'd stopped seeing the people around her as anything but pieces of a puzzle she was trying to solve. She'd needed Mark to be a safe stranger. A practical solution. Nothing more. But people aren't puzzles. They're complicated and messy, and they feel things you can't control. And when she'd seen Mark and Emma together that night, what had hurt most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that she'd been so absent from her daughter's life that Emma had turned to someone else for the connection Sarah should have been providing. Monica came by one evening in January. She found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, staring at bills she couldn't pay, looking 10 years older than she had 6 months ago. "You look terrible," Monica said, setting down coffee and sitting across from her. "Thanks. Have you talked to her?" "She doesn't want to talk to me." "Have you tried?" Sarah looked up. "What am I supposed to say, Monica? Sorry I couldn't protect you from a situation I created. Sorry I was so desperate I moved a strange man into our house and didn't see what was happening until it was too late." You could start with, "I'm sorry." For what? Being right. Monica leaned forward. For making her feel like her feelings weren't valid. For treating her like a child when she's been acting like an adult for years. For being so scared of losing her that you pushed her away. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to fix this. Then maybe you start by admitting you can't fix it. Maybe you start by just being her mother. Not her protector. Not her judge. Just her mother. It was the simplest advice Sarah had ever received. And the hardest to follow. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in late February. Sarah was on her lunch break, sitting in a cafe she'd never been to before, when Mark walked in. They saw each other at the same moment. Both froze. For a second, Sarah thought about leaving. Just standing up and walking out and pretending this moment wasn't happening. But something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that she'd spent 3 months angry and it hadn't changed anything. Or maybe it was just that she was tired of running from uncomfortable truths. Mark approached her table slowly, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. Sarah. Mark. Can I sit? Just for a minute. She wanted to say no. But she nodded. He sat down across from her. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Mark said, I'm sorry. I know. I mean it. What I did, what I almost did, there's no excuse. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. He looked older too. Tired. Beaten down by the weight of his own mistakes. Why? She asked. Why did you let it happen? Mark was quiet. Then he said, because I was drowning. And she made me feel like maybe I wasn't going under alone. It's not her fault. It was never her fault. I was the adult. I should have known better. You should have. I know. Sarah took a breath. I was angry at you. I still am, if I'm being honest. But I'm also angry at myself. I put us all in an impossible situation. I was so desperate to survive that I didn't think about what it might cost. We both made mistakes. Yeah, we did. They sat there, two people who'd tried to save themselves and ended up breaking everything instead. But there was something different in this moment. Something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe understanding. How's Jake? Sarah asked. Struggling. He doesn't trust me much these days. And Emma? Have you heard from her? Mark shook his head. I wouldn't expect to. That's how it should be. Sarah nodded. They both knew Emma needed space. From both of them. They talked for another 20 minutes. Not about what had happened, but about their kids. About work. About the small, mundane details of surviving another day. When Mark finally stood to leave, he said, I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah. I really do. You too, Mark. He walked out. Sarah sat there with her coffee, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness. Not peace. But maybe the beginning of acceptance. Spring came slowly that year. The kind of spring that makes you believe in second chances even when you know better. Sarah was working a morning shift in April when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it. Then she saw the message. Mom, can we talk? I'm not ready to come home yet. But maybe we could meet somewhere. I miss you. Emma. Sarah stared at that text for a full minute. Then she typed back. Yes. Anytime. Anywhere. I miss you too. They met at a park 2 days later. Emma looked different. Stronger. More herself. They sat on a bench near the playground where Ben used to play when he was smaller. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Emma said, I'm sorry for how I handled everything. You don't have to apologize. Yes, I do. I was confused. I thought I felt something I didn't. And I hurt you in the process. Sarah turned to her daughter. I was so focused on protecting you that I forgot to let you make your own choices. Even the wrong ones. They weren't all wrong, Emma said quietly. Living in that house, as crazy as it was, it taught me something. It taught me that I can't keep putting my life on hold for other people. Not for you. Not for Ben. Not for anyone. I never wanted you to do that. I know. But I did it anyway. And I resented you for it. That wasn't fair. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I just wanted to keep you safe. I know, Mom. But safe and alive aren't always the same thing. They sat there, mother and daughter, trying to rebuild something that had been broken. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. But it was real. And sometimes real is better than perfect. As they stood to leave, Emma said, I saw him, you know, Mark, a few weeks ago. At the grocery store. Sarah's chest tightened. Did you talk? No. But I wanted to. I wanted to tell him I understood now. That what I felt wasn't about him. It was about me trying to figure out who I was. Maybe someday you will. Emma nodded. Maybe. But not yet. They walked to their cars. Before Emma got in, she turned back. Mom. Yeah. Thank you. For not giving up on me. Sarah smiled through her tears. Never. 2 weeks later, Sarah checked her mailbox after work. Bills. Advertisements. And a postcard. She recognized Emma's handwriting immediately. The front of the postcard showed a college campus in the spring, trees blooming with pink flowers. On the back, Emma had written, finishing my degree. Got a 4.0 this semester. Found an apartment I actually like. Learning to be okay with who I am. I hope you're both okay. Love always. E. Sarah stood there in the afternoon sun, holding that postcard, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not closure. Life doesn't work that way. But something quieter. Something that felt like peace. She thought about Mark, wherever he was, and hoped he'd found his own version of peace too. She thought about Emma, building a life on her own terms. She thought about Ben, growing up in a world that would keep changing and breaking and rebuilding. And she thought about herself. Still standing. Still surviving. Still learning that sometimes the most painful experiences teach you the most important truths. That love is complicated. That families are messy. That survival sometimes costs more than you thought you could pay. But also that people are resilient. That mistakes don't define you forever. And that second chances come in the quietest moments, when you finally stopped looking for them. Sarah tucked the postcard into her purse and walked inside. The house was quiet. Ben was at school. The rooms no longer echoed with tension and unspoken words. It was just a house again. Not a battlefield. Not a temporary solution. Just a place where one woman and her son were learning to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else saving them. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Under one roof, 5 people had tried to survive. They'd made mistakes. They'd hurt each other. They'd broken things that couldn't be easily repaired. But they'd also learned something essential. That healing doesn't look like forgetting. It looks like understanding. That forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means choosing to move forward anyway. And that sometimes the people who break us are the same ones who teach us how to be whole. Sarah kept that postcard on her fridge. A reminder that Emma was okay. That they were all going to be okay. Not perfect. Not unchanged. But okay. And in the end, okay was more than enough. So here's the question I want to leave you with today. Have you ever made a choice out of desperation that changed everything? Have you ever crossed a line you didn't mean to cross, or watched someone you love make a mistake you couldn't stop? And more importantly, did you find your way back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share your story. Tell me about a time when survival and something else blurred together. Tell me about the moment you realized that being broken doesn't mean you're beyond repair. And if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that we're all just trying our best in impossible situations, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more real stories about real families facing real struggles. Because life isn't about perfect endings. It's about finding peace in the messy middle. It's about learning that under one roof or under separate ones, what matters most is that we keep trying. We keep growing. We keep forgiving ourselves and each other. That's the real story. And it's one we're all still writing. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.